My name is Olivia. I am 38 years old, and for the past 15 years, my life revolved around Mark, my husband, and the comfortable, seemingly perfect world we'd built together. We had the sprawling house in the suburbs of Connecticut, the kind with a perfectly manicured lawn and a porch swing, 2 golden retrievers, and a life that, from the outside, looked like the American dream. He was my rock, my confidant, the man I envisioned growing old with, sharing quiet mornings and endless laughter. All of that, every single illusion, shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. It started subtly enough, a nagging cough that turned into a persistent fever, then an exhaustion that pulled me under like a relentless tide. Within days, I was in the emergency room, struggling to breathe. The diagnosis came swiftly and brutally. A severe, aggressive form of pneumonia that had ravaged my lungs. The doctors were grim, their faces etched with concern as they spoke of ventilators and induced comas. I remember a fleeting moment of panic, a desperate urge to tell Mark I loved him, to see his face one last time before the darkness consumed me. But he wasn't there. He was always so busy with work, I told myself, trying to rationalize his absence. Weeks blurred into an agonizing continuum of beeping machines, hushed medical voices, and the suffocating weight of my own failing body. I drifted in and out of consciousness, snippets of reality breaking through the haze of medication. Each time I surfaced, my first thought was always of Mark. Where was he? Why hadn't he visited? My phone, when I finally managed to ask for it, was a barren landscape of missed calls and unread messages. None from him. Sarah, my best friend since college, was a constant, comforting presence. Her hand a lifeline in the suffocating emptiness of my hospital room. She'd bring me updates from the outside world, small comforts like my favorite tea, and a steady stream of encouragement. "He's probably just overwhelmed, Liv," she'd whisper, trying to reassure me, though even her voice carried a tremor of doubt. But deep down, a cold dread began to fester. Overwhelmed, or simply indifferent. The day I was finally discharged, weak but resolute, I still hadn't seen him. The doctors had warned me about the long recovery ahead, the need for rest, for support. I imagined Mark rushing to my side, a tearful reunion, an outpouring of relief. Instead, Sarah drove me home, her silence speaking volumes. The house, usually so vibrant with life and the comforting chaos of our dogs, was eerily quiet. My heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and an unsettling premonition. I pushed the front door open, the familiar scent of our home hitting me, but it was overlaid with something alien, something sweet and cloying. A cheap perfume I didn't recognize. As I walked through the living room, the quiet hum of conversation drifted from our bedroom. My breath hitched. It wasn't the television. It was human voices, intimate and hushed. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back, to deny what my instincts already knew. But I couldn't. I crept closer, each step a leaden weight, until I stood at the threshold of our bedroom, the room we had shared for a decade and a half. The scene that unfolded before me ripped through my soul with the force of 1,000 knives. There, in our bed, in the very sheets we'd chosen together, was Mark. And tangled with him, her head nestled against his chest, was Tiffany, a woman I vaguely knew from his office Christmas party, a woman whose laugh had always grated on my nerves. They didn't even notice me at first, lost in their own sordid world. Mark was whispering something, his hand stroking her hair. The betrayal was so raw, so visceral, it stole my voice, stole my ability to even scream. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me gasping, suffocating. He hadn't visited me because he was here. He was here, reveling in the arms of another woman, while I fought for every single breath in a sterile hospital room, clinging to the hope of returning to him, to us. The image burned itself into my mind, an indelible scar. The anger, cold and sharp, began to replace the crushing despair. They never saw me. I simply turned, a silent specter, and walked out of the house, the door clicking softly behind me, leaving them in their blissful ignorance. The next few days were a blur of raw emotion, a chaotic dance between searing pain and a chilling, calculated fury. I stayed with Sarah, her apartment becoming my sanctuary, a place where I could unravel without judgment. I recounted the scene in excruciating detail, my voice a hollow whisper, reliving the moment I saw Mark and Tiffany. Sarah listened, her face a mask of disbelief and then hardened resolve. "Olivia," she said, her voice firm, "this isn't just about heartbreak. This is about absolute contempt. While you were fighting for your life, he was this." Her words, though painful, were a balm to my fractured spirit. They validated my anger, transformed it from a messy, destructive force into something precise, something focused. The initial shock slowly gave way to a cold, clear-headed determination. The tears still came, but they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. I realized then that I didn't want him back. The man I thought I knew was a phantom, a carefully constructed lie. What I wanted was justice. Not the kind that comes from a courtroom, but the kind that strips them bare, leaving them with nothing but the bitter taste of their own deceit. They had taken everything from me. My health, my trust, my sense of security, my love. Now it was my turn to take. My recovery, which had felt like an insurmountable mountain just days before, now had a new, powerful purpose. Every painful breath, every grueling physical therapy session, became a step towards their downfall. I pushed myself, driven by an unshakable resolve. Sarah, ever my anchor, helped me navigate the practicalities. We quietly contacted a lawyer, not for divorce proceedings just yet, but to gather information, to understand my legal standing, to ensure every move I made was meticulously planned and protected. It was crucial that Mark remained oblivious to my awareness of his infidelity. I needed to play the long game, to lull him into a false sense of security. I returned to our house a week later, feigning a fragile vulnerability, a quiet acceptance of my illness. Mark, predictably, was all feigned concern and over-the-top apologies for his absence, blaming work emergencies and stress. He even brought me flowers, cheap grocery store roses that smelled of guilt and hypocrisy. I accepted them with a weak smile, my stomach churning. Tiffany was nowhere to be seen, of course. He likely thought he'd gotten away with it, that my near-death experience had somehow erased his transgressions from the universe. How wrong he was. My fragility became my shield, my weapon. I moved slowly, spoke softly, and watched him with an almost clinical detachment. I observed his habits, his schedules, the subtle changes in his demeanor that betrayed his continued affair. He would often work late, or have client dinners that stretched into the early hours. I started to notice the faint scent of that cloying perfume on his clothes, the stray long blonde hair on his jacket. Each discovery fueled the fire within me, solidifying my conviction. I began my research, spending hours on my laptop after Mark had gone to bed, or while he was supposedly at work. I delved into his financial dealings, our joint accounts, his business ventures. Mark owned a significant stake in a tech startup, a company that was on the cusp of a major acquisition. He'd often boasted about its impending success, about how it would set us up for life. This, I realized, was their Achilles heel. Money was his god, his measure of success, his ultimate source of pride. And Tiffany, I knew, was a junior executive at the same company, just a rung or two below him. Their professional lives were inextricably linked. I started to connect the dots. The late-night meetings, the sudden business trips he'd taken while I was still in the hospital, the little gifts he'd started bringing Tiffany. I'd seen the telltale shopping bags, subtly hidden in his car. She wasn't just a one-night stand. This was an ongoing, deeply entrenched affair, one that had been happening for months, if not longer. The realization solidified my resolve. Their betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a professional entanglement, and that, I knew, was where I could hit them hardest. The seeds of my retribution were being meticulously planted, each one a tiny, precise act of vengeance. They never saw it coming, because they were too consumed by their own deceit to notice the quiet storm brewing. My recovery continued, a slow, methodical performance designed to keep Mark entirely off guard. I'd occasionally ask about his long hours, feigning concern for his stress levels, even offering to help with some of his client entertaining, which he'd always gently but firmly decline. Each refusal was a tiny victory, a confirmation of his deceit, and another brick in the foundation of my elaborate plan. Sarah and I spent countless hours refining the strategy. It wasn't enough to expose them. I wanted to dismantle their lives piece by piece, to make them suffer the slow, agonizing loss of everything they held dear, just as I had. My focus narrowed on Mark's startup, Apex Innovations. He was the CEO, and his business partner, David, held the second-largest share. I'd met David a few times at company events. He was a meticulous, somewhat old-fashioned man with a strong sense of ethics and a deep investment in the company's integrity. He was also fiercely loyal to the success of Apex, and I knew he wouldn't tolerate anything that jeopardized its future, especially not something as reckless as an affair with a subordinate that could lead to a massive scandal just as they were nearing a lucrative acquisition. The acquisition itself was the key. A massive tech conglomerate, Synergy Solutions, was poised to buy Apex Innovations for hundreds of millions. The due diligence process was intense, involving meticulous scrutiny of every aspect of Apex's operations, finances, and personnel. Any whiff of scandal, any major liability, could derail the entire deal, costing Mark his fortune, his reputation, and his entire professional future. This was my target. I began by subtly manipulating the narrative within our social circles. When Mark was working late, I'd innocently mentioned to mutual friends how dedicated he was, how he was practically living at the office because of the Synergy deal. I'd express my admiration for his commitment, even as I was gathering irrefutable evidence of his nightly excursions to Tiffany's apartment. I created a fake social media profile, an anonymous burner account, and started following Tiffany's public posts. She was less discreet than Mark, posting coded messages, subtle hints of her secret relationship, and even photos from restaurants I knew Mark frequented. It was all circumstantial, of course, but it was building a compelling picture. My next step involved something more direct. I needed undeniable proof, something that couldn't be explained away. Mark had a habit of leaving his laptop open when he went to bed, trusting in my feigned ignorance and his own inflated sense of security. One night, while he was in the shower, I quietly accessed his computer. My heart hammered in my chest, a mix of fear and exhilaration. I knew this was a gamble, but the stakes were too high not to take it. I navigated to his emails, his messaging apps, anything that might reveal concrete evidence. And there it was, a trove of emails between him and Tiffany, explicit in their content, discussing their secret getaways, their plans for the future, even thinly veiled criticisms of me. There were photos too, sickeningly intimate selfies of them together, some even taken in our home while I was in the hospital. My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to remain calm. I systematically downloaded everything, saving it to an encrypted drive Sarah had provided. I copied financial records, details of shared expenses, anything that linked their personal and professional lives. I even found a draft of a proposal Mark had been working on with Tiffany, outlining a joint venture they would pursue after the Apex acquisition, using his payout. It was a clear breach of company ethics, and potentially even illegal, as it involved diverting company resources and intellectual property for personal gain. This wasn't just infidelity. It was corporate espionage. The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. He wasn't just cheating. He was building a new life with her, leveraging his position and company assets, all while I lay comatose. The cold anger solidified into an unwavering resolve. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about protecting what was rightfully mine, and exposing a deeply corrupt man. The evidence was irrefutable, meticulously catalogued, and ready to be deployed. The trap was set, and they were walking right into it, completely unaware of the digital noose I was tightening around their necks. With the digital evidence secured, my next move was to carefully orchestrate its release. I couldn't just dump it all onto the internet. That would be messy, easily traceable, and might even backfire. I needed a surgical strike, one that would cause maximum damage to both Mark and Tiffany. hitting them where it hurt the most: their careers and their perceived respectability. My target was David, Mark's business partner. He was the linchpin, the ethical core of Apex Innovations, and the person with the most to lose if the acquisition fell through due to Mark's reckless behavior. I drafted a meticulously worded, anonymous email. It was a masterpiece of controlled fury, laced with just enough plausible deniability to protect me. I didn't accuse directly. Instead, I presented the information as a concerned party who had stumbled upon disturbing facts during the Synergy Solutions due diligence process. I hinted at financial impropriety, ethical breaches, and a compromising personal relationship that could jeopardize the entire acquisition. Crucially, I attached a carefully curated selection of the evidence: a few of the more damning emails, the photo of them together in our house, and the draft proposal for their joint venture. The one that clearly showed them attempting to leverage Apex's intellectual property for their personal gain. I sent it from a disposable email account, routed through multiple VPNs, making it virtually untraceable. The email landed in David's inbox late on a Friday evening, ensuring he'd have the weekend to stew over it, to confirm its contents, and to feel the full weight of the impending disaster. I imagined him, a man of routine and order, having his calm weekend shattered by the digital bombshell I dropped. I knew he wouldn't confront Mark immediately. He'd do his own digging, cross-referencing dates and details, confirming the veracity of my anonymous claims. And that's exactly what he did. The following Monday was a masterclass in quiet observation. Mark was agitated, constantly checking his phone, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous twitch. Tiffany, too, seemed on edge, her usual bubbly demeanor replaced by a strained smile. David, however, was the most telling. He arrived early, his face grim, and immediately called Mark into a private meeting. The door to Mark's office remained closed for hours. I could only imagine the tension, the accusations, the desperate denials from Mark as David laid out the evidence, piece by painstaking piece. Later that afternoon, the whispers started. First amongst the junior staff, then rising to a low hum throughout the office. Terms like ethics violation, corporate malfeasance, and breach of contract floated through the air like toxic spores. Synergy Solutions, I learned, had put the acquisition on indefinite hold, citing unforeseen internal issues. The news spread like wildfire, causing a palpable sense of panic throughout Apex Innovations. The stock, which had been soaring in anticipation of the deal, plummeted. I watched Mark's world crumble from a distance, maintaining my facade of the recovering supportive wife. He came home that night a wreck, pale and sweating. He paced the living room, muttering about sabotage and enemies. He even blamed corporate jealousy for the acquisition falling through, completely oblivious to the architect of his downfall living under the same roof. He never once mentioned Tiffany. The next day, David held an emergency all-hands meeting. I wasn't there, but Sarah, who had a contact within the company, relayed every detail. David, visibly shaken, announced Mark's immediate leave of absence, pending an internal investigation. He didn't name Tiffany, but the thinly veiled implications, combined with the whispers, were clear enough. Tiffany, too, was quietly escorted from the premises a few hours later. Her desk cleared, her career at Apex, and likely anywhere else in the industry, effectively over. The irony was not lost on me. The very company they had hoped to leverage for their future was now the instrument of their professional demise. The unraveling had begun, swift and brutal. They never saw it coming, so consumed were they by their own perceived cleverness. The internal investigation at Apex Innovations dragged on for weeks, a slow, torturous dismantling of Mark's professional life. He was officially suspended without pay, his access revoked, his name meticulously scrubbed from company directories. The news spread like wildfire through our shared social circles, the whispers growing louder, morphing from speculation into concrete accusations. Friends, once so eager to bask in our perceived success, now offered hesitant sympathies, their eyes laced with pity and judgment. I maintained my act of the bewildered, heartbroken wife, a master manipulator of perception. I shed tears, but they were crocodile tears, carefully manufactured to elicit sympathy and deflect any suspicion from myself. Mark, meanwhile, was a shell of his former self. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, frantic energy. He tried to contact David to explain, to apologize, but David refused to take his calls. He hired lawyers, but the evidence I had provided was too damning, too meticulously gathered. The draft proposal for his and Tiffany's joint venture, particularly, sealed his fate. It wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about breach of fiduciary duty, about attempting to steal intellectual property. His legal team informed him the best he could hope for was a quiet resignation, an agreement to never work in the industry again, and the forfeiture of his shares in Apex, which were now practically worthless anyway. The Synergy acquisition was officially dead, and with it, Mark's multi-million-dollar payout. Tiffany fared no better. Her reputation was in tatters. She was blacklisted from every major tech company in the region. Her social media, once a platform for her carefully curated life, became a wasteland of angry comments and accusations. I heard through Sarah that she'd moved back in with her parents, utterly disgraced. The life she'd envisioned with Mark, built on my suffering, had crumbled into dust. Then came the divorce proceedings. I had filed for a contentious divorce, citing emotional distress and, of course, adultery. Mark, utterly broken and facing financial ruin, was in no position to fight. He was desperate to avoid public humiliation, desperate to escape the mounting legal fees. I didn't want his money, not really. What I wanted was to strip him of his pride, to make him understand the depth of his betrayal. My demands were simple. The house, the cars, a significant portion of what remained of his dwindling assets, and full legal custody of our beloved dogs, who had been as much victims of his neglect as I was. The day the divorce was finalized, Mark sat across from me in the lawyer's office, a defeated man. His eyes, once so full of a callous disregard, now held a haunted, hollow look. He tried to speak, to offer some semblance of an apology, but I cut him off. "You didn't visit me in the hospital, Mark," I said, my voice cold and flat, devoid of any emotion. "Not once. While I was fighting for my life, you were fighting for a future with her. You chose her. And now you have nothing." His face crumpled. It was the first time I had ever seen him truly broken, truly begging, not for mercy, but for a shred of dignity. He signed the papers without another word. As for Tiffany, I never saw her again. But I heard stories, whispers carried on the wind of her downfall. She bounced from low-paying job to low-paying job, unable to escape the shadow of her past. Mark, too, faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale of hubris and betrayal. He lost everything. His career, his reputation, his home, his wealth, and any respect he might have commanded. He lost the comfortable, predictable life he had taken for granted, the life I had helped him build. He was forced to move into a tiny apartment, stripped of every luxury, left with only the bitter taste of his own choices. They never saw it coming because they were so arrogant, so convinced of their own cleverness, that they never imagined the quiet woman they had wronged possessed the strength, the intelligence, and the unwavering resolve to bring their entire world crashing down around them. My revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was precise, strategic, and utterly devastating. It was a slow burn that left them with nothing but the ashes of their former lives, forever crawling at the feet of their own ruin, begging for a mercy they would never receive.